Well, so what exactly is wetlands mitigation? Why is it required, and why would watershed groups and river advocates really care to tackle it through this kind of project?
Well, you really need to back up and understand why it happens at all. And there's a permit program at the state and federal level usually, certainly at the federal, with the idea of protecting rivers, streams, wetlands. And what the federal level says, and often the state mimics it, is to avoid this. So you're not supposed to destroy wetlands. And the exception to that rule is that when it's unavoidable and necessary in a water-dependent activity and on, then you minimize it and so forth. It's become the reverse, to where people want to build a shopping center or a subdivision or a highway, and there's a wetland in the way, they just think, oh, we'll just go get a permit. So my initial intent, once I got into this, was to stop that and to make people not want to get a permit because they have to deal with me and people like me. Now, once you get in this permit program, you better do it right, or someone besides the government, because they're not doing a very robust job of enforcing. That's why I'm finding these 10 and 20-year-old permits. So the intent is not just to enforce this permit and that permit, but to get the message out there, don't ask for a permit. And I know of one example where a golf course development did a public notice about all these impacts, and after a public notice and I think a public hearing, they redesigned the golf course with no permits needed. Turns out the water hazards were good enough where nature had them. So that's the main goal here. Why you say wetlands is a whole different discussion. They do good things. Animals like them and they filter out stuff. Anyway, forget that for a moment. If your point is to save them, enforcing the bad guys helps keep new people or those same bad guys from asking for more permits. So they design their subdivision with 2 less houses or whatever it is, 5 less parking spaces. So what was your other question?
So given that, if what it is they're supposed to avoid and minimize, and then they get to mitigate if they can't do either of those,
okay.
If they went about it properly. What exactly, what do you see in terms of mitigation? Somebody gets a permit and there's a requirement in there to mitigate.
Okay.
And what are those requirements like?
Okay, so let's assume you don't stop them or you minimize it. Now they're going to get a permit. And a lot of people spend their time on the front end commenting and fighting about should they get a permit. I spend more time looking at them 5 and 10 years later for the reason I just gave you. But once it's decided they're going to get a permit, then they're supposed to offset the loss. And in states like Tennessee, usually there's a 2-to-1. You build twice as many wetlands as you destroy, or twice as many feet of stream as you destroy. Sometimes 3-to-1, sometimes 4-to-1, depending on what you're doing. For example, if your mitigation is to preserve an existing wetland, you probably should get no credit because that wetland is already there and is already supposed to be preserved, but they'll let you do that often as part of a package, sometimes alone, but they require a higher ratio, 4 acres to 1 for preservation. In other states, I've heard about 1-to-1 being the rule, or 1/2 to 1 being common. I heard about one this morning. But once it's decided, the point is to not have on balance a loss. And it really comes from, I think it was George Bush the first that was claiming we're going to restore our nation's wetlands because it was determined that they're a good thing and have no net loss, which is where I got the name of my project, which is yes, net loss. Because they play with numbers, they play with definitions. I heard today someone describing how they started counting lakes. If they had a borrow pit where they dug out dirt to build a highway, and there's a little bit of wetland around the edge, they would count the whole lake because it's wet. And it's really not a wetland, it's a pond, a mud pond. So there's lots of ways to play with numbers. But the intent is to have a growing number of acres of wetlands in the country. There's lots of fallacy, but that was the original intent.